afternoon, everyone. My name is Bill Leeper. I'm the president of the Alumni Association here at Columbia College. I'd like to welcome you all here to our very first Alumni Scholar Lecture Series. This is something we hope to continue on a regular basis, and we look forward to that. We are honored here today to have Colonel Charles McGee to come and speak with us. Just want to let you know that Colonel McGee was a 1998 Distinguished Alumni Award recipient from the Alumni Association. I also want to acknowledge Dr. Tanya Compton, sitting up front here. She was very instrumental in planning this event, and she hosted Mr. McGee in her class today to speak to her students. Now I would like to introduce Dr. Brad Lookingbill. Dr. Lookingbill is Professor of History at Columbia College. He earned a Bachelor of Arts in Education at Southwestern Oklahoma State University, where he graduated summa cum laude in 1991. At the University of Toledo, he obtained a Master of Arts in History in 1993 and the Doctor of Philosophy in History in 1995. From 1995 to 1996, he taught classes in American and World History at Independence Community College in Kansas. In 1996, he joined the Columbia College faculty. Dr. Lookingbill is the author of multiple books and a contributor to several anthologies, encyclopedias, and journals. He recently completed The American Military, A Narrative History, which was published by Wiley Blackwell in 2013. Please welcome Dr. Brad Lookingbill.
Good afternoon. Colonel Charles E. McGee is a living national treasure. Born in 1919, he became a Tuskegee Airman in World War II. The Airmen were the first African Americans to fly in combat. McGee held the Air Force's fighter combat record for many years with 409 missions and 1,151 combat hours flown, serving in World War II and the Korean and Vietnam Wars. In his extraordinarily long career, McGee also commanded a fighter squadron in the Philippines and a reconnaissance squadron at a now-defunct Air Force base just south of Kansas City. McGee was president of the Tuskegee Airman, Inc. from 1983 to 1985, and again from 1998 to 2002, focusing on education, aviation, and space careers for minorities. In 2007, President George W. Bush awarded McGee the Congressional Gold Medal, the nation's highest civilian award. In 2011, he was enshrined in the National Aviation Hall of Fame. Columbia College would like to extend its appreciation by honoring this outstanding individual, a U.S. military service member and a Columbia College graduate of the Kansas City campus. Go Royals! Yeah. Sorry, Dr. Smith. Columbia College has established the Colonel Charles E. McGee Scholarship Fund to recognize Colonel McGee's service. Colonel McGee received the Distinguished Alumni Award from the Alumni Association in 1998. And we are honored that he is the first alumnus to speak in the new Alumni Scholar Lecture Series. One of our goals is for this event to become an annual one. On behalf of the organizers, I want to thank the students, faculty, staff, alumni, and friends of Columbia College for attending. It is my privilege to profess history for a living, so please allow me to do so for just a minute. After Americans entered World War II, the armed forces expanded opportunities for racial and ethnic minorities. At least 1 million African Americans served in uniform, though usually in segregated units. Officer candidate schools began to integrate during the early 1940s. The Army Air Forces included 600 pilots dubbed the Tuskegee Airmen, who distinguished themselves in aerial combat. After members of the 332nd Fighter Group painted parts of their P-51 Mustangs, they became known as Red Tails. While training at Tuskegee Airfield in Alabama, Colonel McGee experienced the thrill of flying a fighter. He later recalled, just to be able to go up at altitudes above all the noise and clutter of the earth. It's something that's hard to put into words. It's a feeling of freedom, of not being bound. It's what stuck with me and kept me at it. Ronald R. Fogelman, U.S. Air Force Chief of Staff, examined Colonel McGee's record and declared, after fighting in World War II, Colonel Charles McGee went on to fly and fight in Korea and Vietnam. He racked up the highest three-war total of fighter missions of any Air Force aviator, 409 missions. He called Colonel McGee an American hero and an Air Force legend. Today, historians place Colonel McGee's story within the context of turning the tide in the Allied effort to defeat the Axis powers. As many as 60 million people perished during the conflict. Over the course of 2,174 days, World War II claimed a life every 3 seconds. Think about that for a moment. The Tuskegee Airmen and scores of other American heroes played a decisive role in liberating Europe from the tyranny of the Third Reich. Their sacrifice was enormous. Their valor is remarkable. Because freedom is not free, no student of history should ever forget their service. So please join me in welcoming Colonel Charles E. McGee.
Thank you very much. Am I coming through all right back there? You hear me all right back? Good. Wave a handkerchief or something. Things fail. Dr. Dalrymple, your staff, colleagues, students, ladies and gentlemen, to me it's a blessing to be able to be here and share with you this evening. And to be the first speaker of this program certainly is indeed an honor, and one I'll cherish, and sir, I hope will be meaningful to those who follow. I told the group once, I've had my high flight, we're passing the torch, so let this be a beginning to pass the torch to the others that follow. I've got a couple of notes here just so I don't stray. But first, I'll just talk with you. Somebody say, who are the Tuskegee Airmen? What is the story? And you've heard some of it. Tuskegee Airmen, those who, we weren't called Tuskegee Airmen that day, but you'll understand as we develop the story. We're those who trained in a segregated program and fought for this country at a time when the country didn't really want us. But that's a part of the story. I often talk and mention to folks, we're talking about attitude. What's your attitude today? And I tell them, what's your attitude about yourself? What's your attitude about those sitting next to you? What's the attitude about your friends? What's your attitude at home, community? And then what's your attitude about this country we live in? But you know, that's another lecture completely. To talk about some things that are happening that ought to be of concern to everybody. But we now call Tuskegee Airmen protected B-17s and B-24s. In that fight against Hitlerism and fight in Germany on foreign soil. We came home, we didn't get in any parades. In fact, coming down the stairwell on the boat, the sign, blacks this way, No, they didn't use that term. We do it today. I don't repeat what they use. And white's another direction. And it was not a pleasant thought, but again, America was still our country. So this activity took place really between the active years of the so-called Tuskegee program was from 1941 to 1949. A lot of folks weren't aware of that. And as I've told some groups, not much good I can say about segregation. But oh yes, there is one thing. From those years, training together, forming combat together, coming home and still together, we developed lifelong friends. And you can't overlook that. So something good came out of it for those of us who went through the experience. But it's not something we need our youngsters of today and tomorrow to live through. We can get along without that type of segregation, but I say it gave us something to keep with. But what did we really accomplish? I told the history class that you mentioned that I spoke to this morning that we dispelled the myths. Oh, by the way, the Army War College in 1925 called these facts bearing on the problem, that the subject of their work was how do we use this 1/10 of our population, how do we use an American Negro if we get involved in another war? Of course, we use the term blacks now. One of these days we'll say just be Americans of a different color. We can hope that days come. But what we accomplished, even though there were circumstances in which it took place, led to a change. And as I put it this way, we dispelled the myths and biases, and as I say in paragraph 3 of their 1925 report to Washington, said facts bearing on the problem. But we dispelled those facts because to me they were myths, biases, generalizations. In fact, sometimes I can actually say outright racism, because it said that we didn't have the intellect to fly, we didn't have the moral fiber to fight, we didn't have the integrity to lead, and we were not intelligent enough to deal in a technical area. Really, I think I was glad I didn't know all of that when I entered the program. I'm not sure how things would turn out. But what we accomplished led to the integration in our services, and fortunately our military services led our country. It might call it even an early civil rights action, but none of us went down to Tuskegee to set the world on fire and bring about a change. We were involved because, America has come out of 10 years of depression. And if you want to say there was ever a time that, regardless of race and so on, the country came together, it was because of the job opportunities that were now available and the war build-up. It was opportunity for those who wanted to go in the factory. It was opportunity, not avoid the draft, but to be of service to our country. So with that, let me cover what I call the 5 phases of the Tuskegee experience. Because you see, those folks in that 1925 War College study forwarded their findings, as I say, those facts that they thought in their attitude was that there were facts, forwarded them to Washington, recommending that it become policy in future War Department plans. Washington bought it, those folks in Washington, so it was enough with that attitude that this part of the country could, as I say, dig ditches, build roads, cook food, drive trucks, but do anything technical? Hey, we studied the issue and it's not possible. Well, we realized that 1939. War clouds in Europe. We're going to help our allies begin to build up. Everybody's interested in being involved. And that led to pressure for inclusion because of that study that the Army felt we couldn't do anything technical. Well, first phase of the now called Tuskegee experience, it wasn't called that then, was, we'll organize a squadron. What was the fighter squadron that day? 99th Pursuit Squadron, 24 aircraft, 30 pilots, and all the fine print, all of the necessary support. What support for a squadron at that time? Well, a couple hundred technicians, mechanics that maintain the aircraft, but we need medical, supply, administration, all of these other skills. That's almost another couple hundred people. Well, let me throw in a little, how did I learn about the program? I had enrolled at the University of Illinois, Champaign, Illinois, was in school there, learned to handle a rifle, had a draft card, but in the black community there was word, there's blacks in training at Chanute Field, Grand Toul, Illinois. Who were these? You see, the Army policy had said in this, even though they're going to experiment with this new squadron, we can't have black pilots because we don't have any black mechanics. Very interesting. So who were the first, now called Tuskegee Airmen? Technicians trained at the technical school, Chanute Field, Grand Toul, Illinois. And by the way, they did well enough that the Army said, we need an airfield to train the pilots. And they found $4 million to build a new airfield. Airfields all around the country. But they built a new airfield 9 miles from Tuskegee, Alabama, for the pilots. So the mechanics trained Chanute, sent south, went through Maxwell Field. While they built field, pilot training began 1941. And by the way, I think all of you maybe know some of the story. There was a gentleman named B.O. Davis Jr., a West Point graduate, 36, said he wanted to fly, and the Army told him, sorry, we have no black units. He went through that first class as a captain. Oh, by the way, his counterparts were all already lieutenant colonels. But he went through the first class of 12 cadets, only 4 graduated. They became the nucleus of that first squadron, 99th Pursuit Squadron. Combat ready December of 42. Army had a problem. No white commander wanted a black unit or black officers. 3 more months of training for the Army finally said, okay, we'll attach them to the 33rd Fighter Group and send them to North Africa. Colonel Momeyer, again, I've mentioned attitude. His attitude, not wanting them. And by the way, segregation went overseas because they didn't go to the base with 33rd. They went to their own base with their support, sent an officer over the 33rd to get their briefing, fly their missions. But Momeyer's report after 2 or 3 months, not aggressive, only shot down 1 aircraft. Little history lesson here. Should go patrol Liberia. You remember where Liberia is in Africa and where the Germans were? Well, take a look if you don't. It was out of the combat zone, if you wish. Well, that brought a hearing back in Washington, and that hearing brought B.O. Davis back to testify and said, only been in combat a short time. Study what's going on. That study showed 99th's bombs on target work was equal to the other squadrons, so stay in combat. Well, what does the old song say? In the meantime, back at home. Training continued because the 99th's going to need replacements. But folks, 3 additional single-engine fighter pilot squadrons were established. the 100th, 301st, and 302nd Squadrons, with all of their necessary support, became the 332nd Fighter Group. 99th store is phase 1 of the experience. 332nd Fighter Group, phase 2. As the 99th was moving out of North Africa into Sicily, out of Sicily into Italy, 332nd Fighter Group was landing directly in Italy. One little bright star in the story when we talk about attitude, because the 99th moving into Italy was assigned to the 79th Fighter Group. Colonel Bill Bates was just happy to have more pilots and more aircraft. They flew together there, and during the Anzio landing beachhead time frame, 99 pilots in a 7 to 8 day time frame shot down 17 German aircraft. Folks, it was all about opportunity, not saying that someone didn't have the ability. Well, the 332nd Fighter Group, we did some patrol work, because although we were combat ready in the P-40, we did additional combat training before leaving the States to fly the P-39 Bel Air Cobra. We were doing patrolling Naples. This is the 3 squadrons of the group, patrolling Naples Harbor and the waterways up to Anzio Beachhead. Well, we got over there in January of '44. You know, they thought we had enough guns on our bomb B-17s and B-24s to protect them, but it wasn't so against the German Air Force. And so 15th Air Force, we were working with 12th Tactical Air Force, 15th Strategic Air Force. We need some fighters to help protect our bombers. 4 groups were picked. 332nd Fighter Group was one of them. We moved from the Naples area to the Adriatic side. The bombers located coming out of North Africa, south of Foggia area, fighters northwest. 4 fighter groups were picked to begin that escort work. And P-39 wasn't the aircraft for that work. We switched P-47 Thunderbolts. And I mention that because folks, our mechanics didn't have hangars and shelters and so on. We had a pier steel runway in a farmer's field in Tent City. But our mechanics, you know, they read the tech order, we read the tech order. In fact, I often used to say, if the crew chief can start it, I can fly it. But we read the tech order, no time to go to school, war is going on, sit in the cockpit, find on the switches, it's going to combat. We switched there. 3 months later, we did the same thing moving to the P-51 Mustang. Well, I'll answer one question now. What's the favorite plane of an old fighter pilot? P-51 Mustang. But I got to qualify it with the Rolls-Royce Merlin engine. It was, the earlier ones had an Allison engine, not so good. But to go on with the story, 332nd Fighter Group. Oh, let me straighten out one thing. So, some of you I know have heard the folks say 332nd never lost a bomber they had under escort to a German fighter. Folks, my statement to you is if you use the word never, qualify it. To say we never lost a fighter, a bomber rather, to a German fighter, that's an unqualified statement and it's not a true statement. We never lost a bomber under escort in 172 missions. That's a qualified statement, you can stand on it. But we flew 179 missions. Well, research and study shows that even though there were some losses, we had the best record of the escort groups protecting our B-17 and B-24 crewmen against German fighters during that period. So that was the standout and of what was accomplished. Now I say the story of the 332nd Fighter Group is the second phase of the experience. And by the way, when we got the P-51 in July of '44, the war tactical war against the Germans was practically over, and they then assigned the 99th to the 332nd Fighter Group. So we had 4 squadrons from July 44 on through the end of the war. And on most missions, each squadron put up 16 aircraft. When I graduated in June of 43, my instructor, we had white Army, experienced Army pilots who were the Czech pilots and seniors in the program. But my instructor said to me, it's too bad they don't have a bomber program for you guys, because I think you'd make a good bomber pilot. Well, I didn't give that much thought of what I was doing for him to make that statement. But he didn't know that 3 months after, they began medium bomber training at Tuskegee Army Airfield because of the need. Twin engine Mitchell B-25, medium bomber. 477th Bomb Group, 4 squadrons, all of the necessary support as well. How many of you heard back there in those days term double victory? Any hands? Oh, a few hands. Well, folks, double victory became about because one of the black newspapers published that we were fighting for 2 victories. First victory against Hitlerism and what was going on in Europe, and the second fight against racism here at home. And this is where the 477th Bomb Group, medium, comes into play, because I found out later it was the same commander we had when we went through training, Tuskegee Army Airfield, too crowded. We went to Selfridge Field in Michigan doing our combat preparation, our gunnery, Oscoda Army Air Base farther up north where we could fire over the lake. But Colonel Selway was still the commander of the base where the 477th began their combat training, preparing to go to the Pacific. But he wanted to maintain segregation, had General Hunter's okay, and he did it this way. By the way, Army regulations had already been published saying there should be no segregation in the use of base facilities and so on. But Colonel Selway would say with General Hunter's okay, well, I'll write a base regulation that says this: on my base, trainees can only use the facilities I designate. Well, who's in training? Members of the 477th Bomb Group, preparing to go to the Pacific. Well, the officers knew what the Army regulations specified. There should be no segregation on the use of the officers' club or the dining room. So they, in 2s and 3s, peacefully tried to enter the officers' club and were denied. Of course, this upset Colonel Selway. So he called the officers in, said, I'd like you to reread my regulation, sign this piece of paper that you'll abide by it. I think most of you know that denying a direct order back in those days didn't look good on any future career for you. But 101 officers refused to sign. We were immediately shipped off from Seymour, Indiana to Godman Field, Kentucky, behind barbed wire guides, all of this, worse treatment than German prisoners of war at the adjacent Fort Knox. But this brought another hearing. And by the way, you now understand this. The story of the 477th Bomb Group medium is the 3rd phase of the Tuskegee experience. But a hearing again in Washington, Colonel Selway's wrong. I don't know where they shipped him. But unfortunately, the Army didn't change the policy. They said, what do we do now? The war's over in Europe. You see, we're up close to 46 time frame. War's over in Europe. We'll have a consolidated group, 477th Composite Group. Keep 2 of the B-25 squadrons, reactivate the 99th Fighter Squadron. Too big an operation for Godman Field, Kentucky. They opened Lockburn Air Base south of Columbus, Ohio, now Rickenbacker Air Base, became the home for this composite group. By the way, when I came home and back, although I'm an old fighter pilot, I became a twin-engine instructor down at Tuskegee and taught some of those bomber pilots. Not to fight the segregation folks, just learn how to fly the airplane. Okay, when they closed training in 1946, war, was over in 45. Training began to subside. They closed training at Tuskegee Army Airfield, and all of us there were, where were we shipped? Lockburn Air Base, Columbus, Ohio. So if somebody ever told you that we had a segregated Air Force for a while, that's what they're talking about, that time frame, because that's where we all were. Okay, 1947, Air Force became a separate service. That consolidated group, composite group, was the fourth phase of the experience. Air Force became a separate service in 1946, but in the 46, 47, it's 1947. Hey, things begin to fade away in time. But there were those in the Air Force, not everybody, but those that said, we need to use people based on training and experience and where needed, not the color of their skin, or as I add, not the happenstance of birth. And we're not getting enough money to keep Lockburn Air Base open, separate but equal to our requirements and so on. We need to integrate. Their decision was enforced by, how many remember the president said the buck stops here? Hey, few of the, hey, Truman and Vance. That's a very interesting story, but that's another story. Truman was a Southern Missourian and had some Southern thoughts, but he's the president that issued two executive orders. 9981 said all of the services need to integrate. But you need to read his story to know some of his thoughts behind that decision. But, the reason he said the buck stops here, he said Congress isn't doing anything. My advisor's saying I'm moving too fast. But here are the executive orders for this country. The other one was that there should be equal access and equal hiring throughout the federal government. That kind of laid the groundwork. When the Air Force became a separate service, the unit was assigned to the Tactical Air Command. Tactical, bombers don't fit. I have no idea what they did with the bombers. But the fifth and final phase of the Tuskegee experience was the reactivation of the 332nd Fighter Group. It became the 332nd Fighter Wing, a wing-based operation. And that's why I say if somebody told you we had a Black Air Force, that's what they're speaking of. There at now Rickenbacker Air Base. A little tidbit, all of you, I think most of you heard flyers that love Top Guns. Heard about Top Guns? Well, they had their first Top Gun meet in May of 1949, but a little bit later, a few years later, the Air Force realized that they needed to write their history. And that first history about Top Guns started out 1949 unknown. Guess who the Top Guns were in the reciprocating engine phase? In May of 1949, pilots of this 332nd Fighter Group flying P-47Ms, folks, were the first Top Guns of our United States Air Force. Well, fortunately, when that history came out, 3 of the pilots and a couple of mechanics still living, they got the story straight and updated the printing. And it's only in this very recent year somebody did the research and found the trophy in the basement of the Air Force Museum. So it does have a little brighter spot or a better location, if you say, today than it did had. But that reactivation in the 332nd Fighter Wing is the fifth and final phase, I call it, of the Tuskegee experience. Now, I wanted to see that picture because when the movie Red Tails came out, everybody thinks the Red Tails are all Tuskegee Airmen. No, they were only the airmen who got into combat in the Mediterranean theater during World War II. A whole lot more to the story. So the total experience of those 5 phases of the Tuskegee program, we're talking some 992 pilots. A little over half of them were single-engine fighter pilots, the balance. Well, there were 60 liaison officers that were shipped away, signed to Army units. And if you have a Tuskegee Airman tell you he served in the Pacific, but wasn't a liaison pilot, well, he was a wannabe. Because they were the only ones, Tuskegee Airmen, we've learned later in history, that went to the Pacific. As I say, the fighter pilots, this little over 300 that got into Europe, went to the Mediterranean theater there, 12th and 15th Air Force. The 477th Bomb Group dropped a big bomb in the Pacific, training phase down. None of the bomb group people got into the war in the Pacific. But those 5 phases and what was accomplished, it wasn't an early civil rights action, but it led to, if you will, civil rights for our country. So what did the airmen do? Given the opportunity, performed well, serving our country, and brought about a change led by the Air Force in our country to use all citizens based on their training and experience and where needed. And it took the Army and the Navy really into the Korean time frame before they really got on board. They did a couple little things prior, but our Air Force led our country in that concept, as I said, led by a very courageous president. What did I accomplish? Let me show you a short film. They always say a picture's worth 1,000 words. I may have another 1,000, but you don't want to hear that, right? So would you please show this story there?
Colonel Charles E. McGee holds the record for most fighter pilot combat missions flown for the United States Air Force. In 1942, the call to World War II found him enlisting in the U.S. Army. Against the backdrop of a strongly racist America, Charles began his 30-year career in the famed All-Black Fighter Unit, which was trained at Tuskegee Army Airfield in Alabama. The Tuskegee Airmen fought to fight for their country in segregated facilities as an experiment by the Army to determine if black Americans had the mental ability and fortitude to fly as combat pilots. Fly they did, and Charles received his wings in June of 1943, was assigned to the 332nd Fighter Group, and sent to Italy in January of 1944. He flew tactical missions in the P-39 with the 12th Air Force, and with the 15th Air Force, strategic bomber escort missions in P-47s and P-51s. He became a flight leader and was promoted to captain. When he had completed 136 missions, he returned to Tuskegee to become a twin-engine instructor in AT-10s and TB-25s until Tuskegee Airfield closed in 1946. Charles was part of the record-breaking squadron that never lost a single bomber to enemy fighters. The experiment was a success, and in the face of what could have been crippling obstacles, the Tuskegee Airmen helped spearhead the integration of the armed forces. In the early 1950s, Charles was assigned to the 67th Fighter Bomber Squadron, 18th Fighter Group, as P-51 pilots were pressed into service in Korea. He flew 100 missions in Korea and was promoted to major. He returned to Clark Field in the Philippines and took command of the 44th Fighter Bomber Squadron. It was there he got his first taste of flying a jet in the F-80. Later, he flew the F-89 Interceptor and was promoted to lieutenant colonel. In 1959, in Italy, he was commander of a 72 30th Support Squadron in conjunction with NATO deployment of the Jupiter missile. 1967 found him flying reconnaissance in the RF-4C Phantom as commander of the 16th TAC Recon Squadron at Tonsanute Air Base. During the Tet Offensive, many pilots were trapped off base, so Charles and the 5 pilots still on base flew the squadron's missions around the clock for 3 days. He ended his Vietnam tour with 173 missions. McGee ended his career as a full colonel, commanding Richards Gabar Air Force Base and the 1840th Air Base Wing. His awards include the Legion of Merit with Cluster, 3 Distinguished Flying Crosses, the Bronze Star. He was also given the Air Medal an amazing 25 times, and many other campaign and service awards. McGee's dedication to aviation didn't stop when he retired in 1973. His activities included managing the Kansas City Downtown Airport and maintaining his commercial pilot's license. Charles is devoted to inspiring today's young people to succeed. He speaks in schools and makes media appearances as a role model of outstanding achievements. He's a life member of the Air Force Association and has served as a chapter and state president. Other life memberships include active participation in the Military Order of World Wars and Tuskegee Airmen, organizations that motivate youth and democratic principles. The Tuskegee program also works with students interested in aerospace careers and provides scholarships and educational assistance.
Our speaker tonight has been chosen by our membership to lead the Tuskegee Airmen into the 21st century.
McGee served as national president of the Tuskegee Airman Organization from 1983 to 1985, and this summer was overwhelmingly re-elected to serve again as president, acknowledging his distinguished dedication to country and continued selfless hours of service in the interest of aviation. The National Aeronautics Association is honored to present Colonel Charles E. McGee with the Elder Statesman of Aviation Award.
We know, folks, what this experience is all about. Reason what we accomplish is important. What are our youngsters today getting? They are America's tomorrow. In fact, I was asked, what would I pass, a little earlier in the question, what would I pass on to the youngsters? Well, very quickly, I put it in 4 Ps. Perceive, prepare, perform, persevere. That's what we did. But perceive, dream your dreams. I wasn't one of those pilots that dreamed, had a flight and say, I want to do that someday. But from my experience, as I say, in ROTC, and after that first flight, I knew I'd made the right decision. I loved flying. Certainly, turns out, served the country for the years, late 50s, when I was in the airlines, they weren't ready for me. So I stayed in the military, but I couldn't have written a script for better opportunities on that I had. But folks, it's how are we bringing on the youngsters behind that are America's tomorrow? That's an important thing. There are things that are happening. I think I've got a little time left, so you don't mind me saying this. As I told the class, well, I think all of you know there already many schools don't say the Pledge of Allegiance anymore, and so on, and it's okay to burn the American flag. Yeah. I've already received 16 2015 calendars. You know what, folks? Only 2 of them show the date to fly the American flag. Were you aware of that? Why? Who? Country's more diverse now than they're talking about bringing in more immigrants, and we're not showing them what days to respect the flag of our country. Something's taking place you need to be aware of. The other thing I pass on, are you mentoring a youngster, whether in your family or a neighbor or so on, that just needs a word of guidance, to believe that they can, believe it's important, the importance of education? unfortunately, some wars, well, they're always telling us, I've forgotten the number, but a great number of high school graduates aren't even prepared to go to college. Technology has gotten youngsters. In fact, somebody said they had a youngster to sign their name, they couldn't. They could only print it. What's happening? Now, our history is, we don't want to repeat it, but they need to be aware. They're our future, and that's what I tell the young folks today. I tell them, hey, we're preparing to go to Mars. But I said, guess who's going to make the trip? It's going to be a youngster there, because the planners are going to be too old when that comes about. But these are things to think about, so hopefully you're monitoring somebody, passing on the good word, and I say history is something to be aware of, but we don't need to repeat everything that happened. I think I planted one question in the room, and I hope somebody else has. I think there's time for some question and answers, so if we need help, who did I plant that question with you? Oh, would you? There.
I was wondering, is this on? I was wondering why you had red tails on your aircraft. That's the plant. And the other one is, I have a friend was a top turret gunner on a B-24, and he says that one of Tuskegee Airmen had a successful flight. In other words, that it was successful in a dogfight. He had a victory pass that involves some aerobatic flying. Do you recall any of those?
Well, I don't have many of those war stories, but the story of the red tails, and they say red tails, what I want to remember, when you say red tails, you're only talking about one of the 5 phases of the Tuskegee experience, and just a few of the several thousand people involved in the program. But you know, the bombers on those B-17s and B-24s need to know what they had in their gun sight. Of course, as one of those pilots, I was glad they needed to know. And the other was that even we pilots didn't want one of our own aircraft in our gun sight. We need that identification of the world. Of those 4 groups picked by 15th Air Force to be in the escort work, they put out a directive. One I could tell you the groups, but I don't have the card in front of me. One was Yellowtails, one was Checkerboard, one was Candy Stripe, 332nd Fighter Group, Red Tail. So that's what's stocked. And folks, it's good that the Red Tails movie came out, because we've actually had the story, and told you segregation went overseas. Many of the bomb groups did not know that the Red Tails were black pilots. That's what segregation meant back in that time. But that's how that came about. But as I say, just remember, I'm one of the red tail pilots, but I wear a red coat occasionally. That gives me a question, who are Tuskegee Airmen today? We did not organize until 1972. And that's when we took on the name, who are we? Tuskegee Airmen, because all of our training, except for mechanics, took place at Tuskegee. Now, the experience began to expand because we went into the bomb group. Navigators were trained at other locations and those types of things. So slowly things began to change back in that time frame. Part of the story. Another question coming. Good.
I'm interested your support of the bombers. I just finished reading a text about the bombing runs there from Italy, and George McGovern was one of the bomber pilots. Did you ever meet him, and were you one of the ones that saved him?
Well, I'd have to pull out my logbook and check his to know. But we have compared with some, and I have run into a couple of pilots where we did fly, manage together. Did I get to know him personally? No. In fact, during that time frame, I didn't get to know any of the bomber pilots. There were a few occasions where going to the officers' rest camp during that time frame was on the Isle of Capri. not for black pilots. We ended up having to have a villa in Naples for our rest periods. There were a few getting to Rome when you could do that, and there were some occasions where some of the bomber pilots met a fighter pilot. All of those gatherings weren't refreshing and welcome, but did happen in a few cases. Most of the bomb groups here back at home, once the story's gotten out, there was an earlier movie in the early 90s. We've had bomber pilots come and just say thank you, because they now realize that those red tails were the ones that helped save their lives. Part of the story. Any other question? Sure. Yes, way back there. There's one. Got the microphone back there? He's all the way back there.
First of all, it's a pleasure to meet you and to be in your presence. I just have one question. What kept you fighting for a country and loving a country that sometimes did not love you back?
Well, a good question, but we don't have 15 minutes for you to give me the full story. But I'll give you part of it, which I included when I commented on the honor to be inducted into the Aviation Hall of Fame. First of all, to have parents and grandparents that get an education, go to high school, go to college. Biblical training, respect your neighbor as yourself. Boy Scout training. You know, folks, if everybody lived by the Scout oath and laws, we'd have a completely different country. But on my honor, I will do my best to do my duty to God, to country, keep myself physically strong, mentally awake, and morally straight. And then understand the meaning of trustworthy, loyal, helpful, friendly, courteous, kind, obedient, cheerful, thrifty, brave, clean, and reverent. And then a few years later in fraternal tenets, I am a fraternity man, Alpha Phi Alpha. But if you're going to be, thumbs up, but if you're going to be first of all, you must first become a servant of all. What other country do I know? America. But those are the tenets that allowed me, you know, what's the old saying? Sticks and stones will break my bones, but words won't hurt me any. I've heard things, but the fighting never solved those issues. So treat them as you wish to be treated. These are the things that I made real. Some in the country didn't like me, but it wasn't all Americans. Our values and freedoms that we enjoy were still available to all. No other country do I know. I wouldn't be welcome or able to say any language in Africa. So why would I turn my back on the country of my grandparents, my parents, and my birth? You just don't do that. We didn't, at least. So again, a lesson for the young folks coming today on the things that are happening. Kind of long coming to answer your question, but I hope you understand that that was the life that I lived and came and still try to pass on to the young folks that's so important to them. And that's why I mentioned earlier, talking to the young folks, attitude. What's your attitude about yourself, person sitting next to you, your so-called friends, your neighbors, family, community? All these things build up. What kind of attitude do you have toward this country that we call America? Yes, sir.
The Tuskegee Airmen were some of the unsung heroes of World War II. There was another group, the women pilots, that flew military planes not in combat, but ferrying and pulling target drones. Did you have any interaction with them before or after the war?
My interaction with the women Air Force service pilots came after the war. There were a few because they were instructors at locations on. But I always told folks, we were treated better than the WASP. They served the country 2 years, sent home, paid their own way home, paid for their burying their own dead. Folks, they were not recognized officially in this country until 1976. So what we accomplished and what they did, as I say, we were at least commissioned, even though we weren't accepted everywhere. They weren't. Those things are part of the history we need to know about, but let's don't repeat them for the youngsters that are ahead. Thank you for the question.
Sir?
Yes?
What altitude did you fly at?
Say again?
What altitude did you fly at?
Oh, altitude. Well, it depended on the mission. Generally, the B-24s were usually in the 22 to 25,000 feet area. B-17s would be in the area from 24 to 27,000 feet because they had a little better engine, could fly a little higher. That's why we liked. P-47 was a great aircraft, large roomy cockpit, extra pair of guns, 8 guns instead of 6. But that big radial nose limited the range, altitude, and speed of the aircraft. Why was the P-51 the favorite aircraft of the day? Good from the ground to 35,000 feet. And we could get above the B-17s. We could do the things that were needed to protect them. And of course, they fly slower. We'd do some S-ing over them and that type of thing. But folks, we built the P-51 for the English, but we found it was a great airplane for us to fly to. But our altitude range, P-47 limited, performed not individual aircraft, but as a group. As I say, we put up 16 aircraft. Limited performance, 28 to 30,000 feet. As I say, the 51 was good to 35, so it gave us the airplane to really allow us to do the tasks that we had to do. Yes, ma'am.
First of all, thank you for visiting with us at our college today. Second of all, as a participant and observer of American history over a fairly significant period of time, what do you think are the maybe 1 or 2 big problems confronting America today?
Well, gosh, how many of these problems do I have time to talk about? But unfortunately, when we're talking about teachers, folks, it's a shame to go into some cities and go into some schools and realize what's still going on. With tenured teachers that should have been out of the system long before. Not, hey, can't fight tenure, that's important. Qualification is more important. And sometimes we don't put things in the right perspective. But this is things that we need to be concerned about and what's going on. What do they say? What's the number? And I don't remember. Too many of our high school graduates aren't prepared for college. Whose fault? What's going on? Who's getting paid to teach our youngsters? Something for us to think about. Very much of concern and ought to be, but that's what I say. Find a youngster in your neighborhood or friend somewhere that just needs monitoring or a pat on the back, because they are our future. And we need to be aware of that. There's so many other things I mentioned, and not showing us when we ought to fly the flag, but there's some other things going on. You know, when they don't want to say the pledge in school, things. This ought to be of concern if America is going to retain its freedoms and still be the #1 country in the world. I think, well, time is just about run out. So thank you for your presence, wonderful audience. Thank you for the invitation to be a speaker at this now historic occasion. Did you have another question? No? Okay. But it's just been a pleasure to be here, part. God bless you. God bless these United States of America. Thank you.
Colonel McGee, thank you so much for service to our country. Thank you for being a great American. And thank you for honoring us with your presence here today. We have a small token of our appreciation to commemorate today's event, kicking off our lecture series. We want to present you with a poster of today's event, and certainly we appreciate all you've done. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. That's beautiful. You know, my daughter insists on pictures being hung up. I don't know what's coming down for this to go up. Thank you so much. And that is me.
This concludes our event. You can welcome to go out into the atrium for refreshments and a signed poster by Colonel McGee. So, thank you.
Thank you.